S. Cohen was sworn in as the nation's 20th Secretary of Defense on January 24, 1997. Born in Bangor, Maine, in 1940, he served his home state from 1973 to 1997 in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, where he was an influential voice on defense and international security issues. He has received several honors from 1997 when he was named one of Time magazine's sorry. He has received several honors from 1974, when he was named one of Time magazine's 200 future leaders, to 1996, when he was awarded the U.S. Special Operations Command Medal. Author or co-author of 8 books, he is married to Janet Langhart, president of Langhart Communications, and has 2 grown sons. Please welcome Secretary of Defense, William S. Cohen.
Angela, thank you very much. I was getting nervous that you were so nervous. But thank you for going through that resume, and I appreciate the introduction to my fellow senators. Usually when I would get up on the Senate floor, I would refer to my dear, distinguished colleagues, my distinguished friend, my senator friend from whatever the state it was, and now I have a chance to do it once again with you today. I was talking with Angela on the way up, and I mentioned that actually I was speaking to my 2 escorts on the way up, and mentioned that I had spoken to Girl State for 24 consecutive years. And the reason it's so memorable is that it always came on Father's Day. When I had actually wanted to be with my family during that time, and instead I decided that it was more important that I speak to 500, usually 500 of the best and brightest of the state of Maine. And here you are, the best and brightest of the best and brightest. So you are the cream of the crop who have come to Washington. But I always found it, I must tell you, I always found it to be the most exhilarating type of experience that I would have, because I spoke at a place called Husson College, and it was a huge auditorium without any air conditioning. It was always very, very warm, and it was filled with 450, 500 young women from all over the state of Maine who always posed the best questions, the toughest questions, and I would go in to speak usually for a half hour to 45 minutes, and it was always customary. I went in at 7, I didn't get out until 9:15. So there were so many questions, and they were so intelligent, so insightful, that I found it to be one of the most rewarding experiences that I ever had as a member of the Senate. So it's another reason why I wanted to be here, to greet you, to welcome you to Washington, to say it's an exciting time to be here, a warm time albeit. I just returned from a fairly quick but grueling trip overseas. I was with the President and Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, in Madrid, and it was a very historic occasion when we witnessed the voting on the part of the NATO countries to enlarge NATO by adding 3 additional countries, Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. And then I went on from there. I went from Madrid, I went out to visit the troops in Rota, Spain, and then went up to Hungary to visit our troops in Tezar, a base that we have there, in which we had almost 800 to 1,000 young men and women who were serving this country based over there. And went from Hungary to the Ukraine at a training base called Lviv, where they had a Partnership for Peace training exercise that had just been completed, and there were some 9 or 10 countries who had participated in that exercise. Then went to Kiev with the Minister of Defense, and then from Kiev went to Sofia in Bulgaria, and then came back here. And so it's been a very quick trip. If I seem disconnected, it's because I'm still a little bit on European time as opposed to Washington time. What I want to say just quickly, and I know I've taken up too much of your time keeping you waiting already, but as you go around Washington, you see the various things. I know you're going up to Capitol Hill. You're going to visit with members of the House and the Senate. You'll be meeting with key members of Congress. You'll meet with the President this Friday. If you have a chance to see some of the memorials, you might stop and see FDR's memorial. If you've already done that, you notice there are two things that stood out. Number one, FDR had his dog, which is very important. And I always look, as a dog lover, I always look to see that. But also there is Eleanor Roosevelt. And that's a very important symbol. She was very important to FDR, certainly during his lifetime, his administration, and she still stands as an outstanding role model for women even today. You might hope you'll meet the First Lady if she's not on some world tour, which she is, visiting countries and really doing an outstanding job to make a difference, to make a big contribution to the lives of millions of children in this country and elsewhere, and determined to be more than simply a ceremonial participant with the President, and she is doing an outstanding job. You might run into Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, the first woman to occupy that position, and as I said, I was with her in Madrid. And it was an exciting moment to be there with her, and what an outstanding job she is doing. And she went on from Madrid to the Czech Republic. It was a very emotional moment for her. Her family was driven from Czechoslovakia twice, once by the Nazis and once by the communists. And so for her to go back as Secretary of State of the United States to her roots, it was a very emotional experience for her, and I think for the Czech people. You might find yourself running into Janet Reno, the Attorney General. We have the responsibility to try to maintain some order in the universe, so to speak, in terms of our military and where we send our men and women to represent the United States, to pursue our interests, to protect our interests. But she has a very tough job because she's responsible for kind of law and order and keeping the peace in the United States. But she does an outstanding job. I was thinking of Donna Shalala, head of the Health and Human Services. I've been thinking of Sheila Widnall, the Secretary of the Air Force, the first woman to hold that position in the Pentagon, and perhaps during the course of your activities here, you might run into Secretary Widnall. There's Captain Deborah Lohr, who is one of my assistants. She's a military assistant to me, and she's the commander of a ship. She goes out and commands a ship. She's on shore duty right now. But someone I'm very proud to have advising me and assisting me in military affairs. And there are so many individuals you will see today, so many women, who have really risen to the top of political institutions and are making a major difference in the lives of this country. There's a lot of controversy you might see in the press today about our military in terms of what are the role of women. A lot of controversy on accusations about abuse. But it is very minor in the scheme of things. If you look at our military today, you will find that we have the best and the brightest in the military the world over. In the history of this country, certainly, in the history of the world, I don't think there's ever been a more capable, more disciplined, more dedicated and talented group of men and women that we have in today's armed forces. And so you tend to see some of the negative things that get printed from time to time. And the role of the women in our military has to be really understood. It is a major contribution. You comprise somewhere between almost 14% of the military today. Back in 1972, it was only 2%. So you can see how it's been expanding, and most of the military positions are open to women today, to commanding ships, to flying aircraft. We have the chief of the protocol office here in the Pentagon, who is a KC-135 pilot. And so there are very few limitations that are placed upon women in our military today, and frankly, we couldn't get along without them. We could not have the all-volunteer service that we have today without the major contribution of women in our military. So there are enormous opportunities, and I hope that you'll have a chance to see some of that and to be inspired by it. And I know from my past experience in dealing with the members who attended Girls State, I was always impressed that the quality of the people who managed to get selected to attend Girls State and now Girls Nation means that you're going to be the future leaders of this country. And so you have a lot of role models you can point to and look up to and then emulate. And I just wanted to come by and congratulate you on your outstanding records. The fact that you're here is testament itself to your capabilities and to your leadership potential. And if I have a few moments, I could perhaps entertain, I want to come down here, or I can at least talk to you, come down here and entertain a few of your questions. All the good things that we're doing, and to overcome that flow of negativity. But I must tell you that I just got back. I was over in Tezar in Hungary. There were about almost 800, 900 young men and women who were serving over there. They were fired up. They were happy to be doing what they're doing. I have visited troops all over the world. They are very committed to their jobs, and so there's not a loss of morale. The problem we always have to deal with is maintaining the quality of life so that the people that we attract in the military will want to stay there, because it really doesn't do us very much good if people come in and serve 3 or 4 or 5 years or 6 years and then move out. Because they're disenchanted with the quality of life and the pressures that are placed upon them and their families, and the lack of good housing and compensation and daycare for their children, et cetera. So that's the real task that I have, is to make sure morale stays high and the quality of life features are the most important. But I think everyone understands that within an organization as large as the United States military, you're going to have some problems. We have fewer problems than we have in society itself in all of our relations, and so that's why the people still respect the military. Boy, there's so many questions. I won't get out of here today to do my next event. Yes?
I'm Rachel Smith from Colorado. I'm wondering, what do you think about the idea of drafting women?
What do I think about the idea of drafting women? The question would be not drafting women, but whether we could have a draft at all. We now have an all-volunteer force. I don't foresee the prospect of going to a draft, number one. It would not be necessary in view of the fact that we're actually downsizing. We don't need a tremendous influx of more people coming in. We're now downsizing the military. In fact, I've recommended some further cuts in our military in order to meet the budgetary restraints that we have. And you really are talking about a draft if you have to have large numbers of people to come in a time of need. I think that there's something that we should give consideration to, and that is to have some kind of alternative service requirement, so that those who didn't want to go into the military as such could nonetheless make a contribution to the country. But that gets into an expense item in terms of how much are we willing to spend in order to have virtually every graduate of high school or college spend 1 or 2 years serving the country. How much compensation we have to provide, what would be the situation if they had families. You have all of those complications you get into when you start looking at changing the system. But we have an all-volunteer force now, and I don't foresee changing that, even though I think that it's great that you would even consider getting in the military yourself, right? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Alice Hershey from Indiana. I'm curious why NATO is still necessary when it was created as a part of the Cold War and defense against the Soviet Union, which has since broken up.
You all heard the question, why is NATO still necessary? NATO has been the most successful military alliance in the history of this century, certainly, and perhaps ever. And it has been, you're right, was originally conceived to be a defensive alliance against protecting those countries of the West against any thrust coming from the former Soviet Union. The Soviet Union no longer exists, why have it? It is important, we think, because it has established stability in Europe, and that's where we fought 2 world wars this century. And you can see what has taken place in Albania, you see what's taken place in Bosnia, you can see what could take place in other countries throughout Europe where they have ethnic tensions, where they have border disputes, and that's how wars get started. To the extent that we can continue to maintain the alliance and also spread its ideals, get countries to open their markets, to have free and open markets, to get them to have civilian authority over the military, to promote human rights, to have respect for human rights, to respect the borders of their neighbors. That will spread stability throughout Central and Eastern Europe and also bring with it prosperity. To the extent you have stability and prosperity, you have less of a chance of having to have conflict in the future, in which case we would be involved in future wars. So that's why we're trying to expand NATO in that fashion. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Teresa from South Carolina, and your past record proves that you were, seems like you were very Republican. What made you decide to,
Which records were you looking at?
that you supported the Reagan administration, the Bush administration, or some Republican administration in the 80s?
No, I'm
What
not.
made you decide to accept this high-ranking cabinet position in the Clinton administration?
Okay. Did you all hear that question? That she checked out my record and had a pretty strong record as a Republican. I appreciate that. There may be some people on the Hill who might disagree with you from that perspective, but it's an unusual situation. I think it has not occurred in history in terms of a president picking an elected official, a formerly elected official, to serve in his cabinet from the opposite party. There have been other Republicans who have served in Democratic administrations. Secretary McNamara, for example, was a Republican who served in the Kennedy administration many years ago, and there have been some other examples. But very few, if any, political figures who have served in a different party of an administration. This I give credit not to me, but to President Clinton. This is one of the most important positions in the entire government. It's one of the most difficult because it's such a large, complicated organization with so many serious responsibilities. He could have picked any number of prominent Democrats to serve in his cabinet. But he asked me to do this, and I thought it was a very bold step on his part because he was saying to the country, I want to reach across party lines and try to build a bipartisan consensus on issues that affect our national security. So I'm going to ask this Republican to come and serve in my administration. So it was not really my decision. It was my decision to accept, but it was his decision to make this offer. It was an offer I couldn't refuse. Anytime you have a chance to serve your country in this position, you could not walk away. I was planning to leave public service. I had announced my retirement from the Senate and was very busy getting myself together to form a little company and start my own enterprise as such and do some other things. And so I was on the way out the door. I had just about shut the lights off and was closing the door when the phone rang. And I went back in, so to speak, and it was the president said, how'd you like to be Secretary of Defense? So he really gets the credit, not me. I wasn't seeking it, and he was searching for someone who could hopefully handle the job and come from the Republican Party.
We have time for one more question.
You pick it. I can't do this. I'll get in trouble if I...
I'm Louisa from Virginia. What do you think the current role of the U.S. military should
what do I think the current role of the military should be in Japan? We just had something called the QDR, Quadrennial Defense Review. It was a study that took about 6 months to complete. And we made a decision in that QDR that we were going to have a policy that allowed us to what we call shape the environment. Our strategy was to be shaping the environment, meaning we were going to be forward deployed. We were going to have roughly 100,000 people in the Asia-Pacific region, including our forces that are currently stationed in Japan, 100,000 in the European theater, plus the people that we have committed to the Arabian Gulf area. That 100,000 is very important, and we intend to remain forward deployed in Japan as long, of course, as the Japanese government says that they want us. We don't go anywhere we're not wanted. If they were to say tomorrow, thank you very much, but we don't want you here, we pack up our bags and we leave. We're not interested in occupying anybody else's territory. So we go where we go at the, really at the sufferance or at the invitation of the host government. So the Japanese government, fortunately, for them and for us, still wants the Americans to maintain a significant presence in the Asia-Pacific region. And in that way, we are helping to stabilize all of that region so that other countries don't feel that they're threatened by their neighbors. They don't have to then arm themselves to the teeth, so to speak, to go to a potential war with each other, that the United States provides that kind of umbrella of protection in that region. And so, again, we help to stabilize it, and by stabilizing it, they are allowed to prosper. So the Japanese government, we have just produced a U.S.-Japanese defense guidelines update, a modernization of that. In fact, I'll be going over this fall to meet with Japanese officials to hopefully publish the final version. But it basically says we're there to stay as long as the Japanese government wants us to stay, and we're there to stay in the region because we're a very stabilizing force there. And with that, I must take my leave and go give another speech.